Hello everyone. In a world where I ordinarily really get annoyed with like the lighting situation, the natural lighting situation, blah blah blah, I happen to be recording at exactly, well I don't know if it's exactly the case, but at the golden hour. Now you probably can't tell because, well, to be honest, like I don't have the direct sunlight streaming in, and even if I did, it would still probably be blindingly bright in a bad way. You know what the golden hour is, though. It's that moment where the sun casts a very soft yellow light, and it looks very pretty. Especially, because all of the outdoors is bejeweled with a thin layer of frost. So everything's kind of shining in a brilliant golden light. There's no way my camera would be able to adequately pick it up. I think for me, as someone who doesn't know much about cameras, that's the way I would ascertain the quality of a camera. You know, people talk about, all these different metrics and megapixels and so on. For me, I think the real question of a camera is what aspects of the real world that you'd imagine would be really hard to capture is this camera able to capture? You know, if I go outside and I look at the moon, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Just to look at the moon and it's like so big and bright in the sky. If I was to hire like a photographer or a videographer, the first thing I'd say is, all right, I want you to go out and film the moon and like make it look as good as you can. Like have some kind of shot or whatever where you're incorporating the moon and just make the moon look really good. Because I think that's really difficult to pull off. And similar, I imagine, would be the very subtle like beauty of the way that the golden rays of sun are streaming through the bushes and trees that I can see out my window. And I suppose the other thing I should say, just before I forget, is yes, I've had a haircut. That's not that interesting, to be honest. I don't know. Remember when I used to have long hair and then I got a haircut? Wow. Anyway, there's one more thing. Oh yes. I will give you guys some advance warning. Advance warning at the risk of jinxing things. I may be moving into a new house. Not necessarily in a week, not even in a month. It will hopefully be a year. Or, within a year. But I mean, hopefully it will be within just a few months. And the reason why is because last week, my wife and I were approved for a mortgage. The technical term is an agreement in principle, which is the bank saying, we're not giving you the mortgage yet because, we don't know exactly how much we need to borrow. Because, we haven't actually put down an offer for a house yet, but it's the bank saying, this is how much we'd be willing to give you based on how much you're earning. And, I will say now, you're all very appreciated on Patreon. The truth is it's mostly my wife who's contributing to the, because you're earning this much, this is how much we're willing to give you. But by all means, I mean, if you are there on Patreon, thank you. And who knows, maybe once we've actually got the mortgage to pay off, I'll be even more aggressive with the, please contribute on Patreon stuff. We'll see. Oh, my voice cracked a bit. But yeah, and then the thing is we've actually now found a house. And honestly, I mean, this house is, I really like it. And I'm going to, the thing is, I emailed the people and they didn't respond. So I'm like, screw it, I'm going to call them. So once I'm done with this, literally while I'm doing some of the, the rendering and things like that, I'm going to give them a call and be like, hey, emailed you about wanting to set up a viewing of this house, because the house is about half an hour's drive north of me. And it just so happens that this Saturday we are going to see my grandparents who live, basically an hour north of me. So it'll be really convenient to drive up the half an hour to where we're staying in our house, or where, the house we're looking at, give that a viewing. And honestly, I mean, I'm really enthused by it. So, like every other house I've seen, just like, there's just so many, I like the positives are just crazy. I think sometimes people look at, like, one of the things that, I don't want to say corrected, but I'm going to say corrected my wife on is that she was like looking at houses and saying, like, oh, these houses are nice. And I was saying, like, but I feel like you're mostly focusing on the interior design and the furniture. One of those things, the interior design, is something we could just change anyway. Like, if we don't like the color of a room, we can just paint the room. And the other thing, the furniture, that might not necessarily be there at all. There's a very strong chance they'd be moving the furniture out. So at the end of the day, any other house, we could just get similar furniture and paint the rooms a similar color. And to be fair, I would say that, like, if you are thinking about, like, if you, I don't know, wanting to revamp your house, probably a smart thing to do is go on to, you know, a house buying site, a realty site, and look at the houses and then say, oh, I like the look of that house. And then chances are, again, with some paint and maybe switching up some of your furniture, you could make your house look like that. But yeah, so I was like, that doesn't really make sense. The things that I'm interested in are its location. It's 3 minutes walk away from a pub. I feel like my voice is cracked twice now, but I don't care. 3 minutes walk away from a bus stop. The bus comes every 7 minutes, that bus stop. It takes 6 minutes to get into the town centre on the bus. It has off-road parking, meaning you don't have to, because in the UK, I mean, obviously, a lot of places weren't built for the car. They were built for like horse and cart, and therefore a lot of places, especially a lot of nice areas, don't have like dedicated driveways because they're really old areas. So, you know, they'd have had to, like, they haven't widened the roads such that you could have those dedicated driveways. So everyone just has to park on the road, which means that it's almost impossible to actually, like, there's a road near me, which I always intentionally avoid because it's a long, bending road that has all cars on one side, meaning that there's a significant risk that you could come across a car going the other way. And then, because there's all cars parked up along the side of the road, there's no room for that car to get past. So you might have to, like, one of you at that point has to reverse all the way back in order to let that car pass. And that's obviously ridiculous. So yeah, anyway, I spoke about that. I've spoken about that enough. I just thought, you know, since you're Patreon, I hope that didn't seem like a pointless thing to start the video off with. I thought that, you know, as contributors to Patreon, you would be interested in knowing some extra behind the scenes details. But yeah, fingers crossed, I haven't jinxed it, and, you know, I end up being like, oh, actually, you know what, that house, we couldn't get it, or, you know, admittedly, I'm a bit worried about the whole, like, agreement in principle thing. Like, okay, but what principle? You know, what's the agreement here? Anyway, so we're going to be watching I didn't mention this actually. So last week, the video I was currently working on lost comfortably in the you know, do you want me to continue responding to this video, as I kind of suspected it would, because as I was kind of saying during the video, there was like actually not very much disagreement. It was, if you can't remember, someone who had a very reasonably non-committal pro-trans stance being responded to by some people who had some reasonably non-committed anti-trans stance, to another person then responding to that who had a reasonably non-committed pro-trans stance, to then me responding to like three separate groups of people at once, neither of whom, or none of whom, were saying anything particularly interesting. So I'm not surprised it lost. And, you know, just for the record, I don't want, like, whoever suggested that video, I don't want you to be sat there thinking, I made a terrible suggestion. You know, like, look, it was fun to respond to while I was responding to it. But, yeah, I just don't think there was much to be gained from continuing to respond to it. So, now you guys have voted again. We've got another quite comfortable victory. 42% of you voted for this. I do wonder, of course, you know, it's very rare that one of these videos wins a majoritarian victory. Maybe I should institute a ranked preference system, but 42% to 25% in the next spot. And the video is Abigail Thorne has a sexistential crisis. So this is Philosophy Tube. I'm a little bit, look, I don't want to, you know, what's the word? I don't want to say, well, it's not look a gift horse in the mouth. I guess just like be a negative before we even started. But the only thing I'm a bit worried about is, like, this is an interview. And the only thing about interviews is sometimes, you know, obviously that can be a situation where I'm sat there for a lot of time being like, you know, what's actually being said here? Okay, I'll remember to actually hit the record button because I forgot to do that last time. So start recording. You can see it's an interview. Okay. Oh God. I'm just looking at the background. Bottom nation. We're having gay sex. We're having gay sex. Like, I don't know what kind of, trans or queer or non-binary these people are, whether they're, like, lesbians or whether they're pretending they're not lesbians. But then the thing is, like, the confusing thing about it is the term bottom, because I always thought of bottom as exclusively referring to gay sex. So who knows? Maybe this is a trans thing. Anyway, so yeah, we'll jump into the video. I suppose the good thing is that having, spent about 10 minutes at the beginning talking about the whole house situation, it means it's not the end of the world if I end up sitting here for a little while not responding to anything. Let's go.
Hi, Bottom Nation. Oh my God. Let's go.
I don't know what was funny about that. I'm almost like thinking, again, I don't want to like be presumptive here. I'm almost like terrified that the woman on the left actually claims to be a gay man and therefore claims to be a gay bottom and is like, hey, gay men, have sex with my vagina, because it's basically the same thing. Which, I mean, let's be honest, like this, I would kind of be interested to know these people's names, but I guess Ashley, this Ashley person, I don't know if that's like see, that's annoying, isn't it? This is a bit like a It's Pat thing from SNL, and I think this is a joke that's been done elsewhere, where that is actually an ambiguous name, right? Because there are men called Ashley, but there are definitely women called Ashley. In my head, I'd say Ashley's a woman's name. But yeah, so I don't know. But maybe this Ashley person claims to be a man without looking anything like a man or acting anything like a man. I know I recently did my video, my world famous, infinitely positively received video about how having sex with men isn't actually gay if you're a dude. But obviously, as I made a specific point to clarify at the end of that video, essentially, the point of the video, just to refresh your memory, was that sometimes having sex with someone based on the fact they look like the type of person you would typically have sex with, even if they don't actually fit into the ordinary categorization of who you'd typically have sex with, is legitimate, but at the same time, it's also going to be very rare. So in my case, if I am ordinarily attracted to women, then maybe there'd be someone who looks a lot like a woman, in which case if they look a lot like a woman, look like someone I would typically, have sex with, then I would, based on that, be willing to have sex with them. But obviously, if they're in fact not a woman, that's likely to be very rare.
I was really excited to do the intro because you were really excited about the guest.
Sounds like Steve-O.
I had a bit of a fucking crisis a couple of years ago. I went on a date.
Yeah, we know.
This is so nice. It feels so right. Like, am I straight? Like, what's going on? Like, I've hardly been with any guys before, but this is just like really different. I really love it. It's so nice. It feels so great. Maybe I'm straight. Maybe that's what's going on. 6 months later, they come out. Now a woman. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Well, again, that doesn't, like, that's so weird. Like, it's so weird that that's actually how they think of the world. And I'm saying they to mean all of them. And that's the position I kind of made fun of at the end of, like, my most recent video. The fact that however confusing sexuality is, one thing's obvious. Trans ideology is not the solution, because trans ideology says that, and again, the analogy I gave is if my wife came out as a man, if my wife decided she was a man tomorrow or today, then that would suddenly make me gay and make us be in a gay marriage. And obviously that's ridiculous. But what Philosophy Tube is just saying there is, I had sex with a man, someone who presented as a man, someone who was obviously a man, presumably with a penis being involved. Isn't that weird? I'm not a straight woman. I mean, to be fair, that's half right. I'm not a straight woman. I'm a lesbian. So how could I enjoy having sex with this man? Oh, I see. Don't worry. Turns out it was actually lesbian sex, because 6 months later, this man declared himself to be a woman. That's insane. That is an insane, because for Philosophy Tube to be saying that, it must not have been obvious that this person like identified as trans. So, because otherwise, or was going to identify as trans, because otherwise, you'd probably expect that. So presumably, this was just a man presenting 100% as a man. If you're a biological male who has sex with someone who is presenting 100% man, just looks like your typical man on the street that you would just see, then you are gay. You're not a straight woman. You're definitely not a lesbian. And the idea of saying, oh, actually, like factoring into it at all, the fact that suddenly later on, this dude's like, oh, actually turns out I'm a woman. Oh, suddenly that explains everything. No, it doesn't explain anything. It just makes you sound insane.
Thank you for being here. We're having gay sex with Abigail Thorne, and I'm so excited to be having gay sex with you.
Philosophy Tube makes me so uncomfortable. Ever since the Ash Sakar interview, where Philosophy Tube was just like, I don't really speak about this issue. I don't have any opinions. Like, it was just such an awkward interview, and I hated it. So we'll see.
So I got the logic up here. I can fucking sort through shit.
I don't think that she has the logic up there.
But I was watching that, I don't know, this was maybe like a few years ago, and I
haven't actually ever watched. Hello, my thing fell off. I haven't actually ever watched Michael Stevens' video "Do Chairs Exist?" Like, I'm aware of it, and it's just like, for me, I'm like, because of the association with the whole, like, oh, define a chair means you can't define a woman thing. It's just like, I know, or I'm worried that Vsauce, who I do admire tremendously as a creator, is going to come to the stupid conclusion of, therefore, like, because we don't have an immediate off-the-cuff definition we can give of a thing, therefore it doesn't exist. And I just think that's, like, so obviously not true, because if we use a word, I mean, I've said this before, if we use a word to describe something, that thing exists. Like, it's just unless, okay, let me rephrase that actually. That concept exists. It doesn't necessarily mean that thing exists in reality. So, for example, if we use the word unicorn, that doesn't mean that a unicorn exists in reality, but it does mean that we have a concept of what a unicorn is. And I mean, if anything, for imaginary concepts, it's much easier to know what it is, because, you know, you'd have to get into like, what about this thing that has the genetic code of a unicorn or whatever? It doesn't matter, because, you know, there isn't such a thing. But yeah, even for real things, the fact we're using these terms, I was thinking about it recently. I was wondering how old Pope Francis is, because I was interested in when he's going to die and when we're going to get a new pope. Partially because I watched the movie Conclave, which I don't think is a good movie, although I did technically give it, I think, like a low 6 out of 10, which suggests it's better than bad. But, you know, it's just not a great movie. But I was watching it, I was like, oh, you know, getting a pope, that could be kind of interesting next time that happens. So yeah, looking up Pope Francis, how old is he, when's he going to die? And then I saw, and I know this makes sense, that, you know, his citizenship is Argentinian, and also, like it says, adopted or, you know, given Vatican City citizenship. And I thought to myself, like, you know, obviously people say, well, why is the Vatican City a country? I thought, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Like, because it's a sovereign territory. I feel like, you know, people will say, oh, country, that's like a really hard concept to define. But I don't really know if it is. I mean, this is going to sound, like, this probably is not going to be a perfect definition, but in some sense, it's like, if there is another governing authority above you that can tell you what to do, and it would not be considered legitimate for you to ignore that country or that governing authority, then you're not a country, right? So Vatican City, the reason why the Vatican City is a country is because the government of Italy can't tell the Vatican City what to do. If it did that, I mean, it could, but, you know, it would have to be in the form of, you know, we're going to invade you or something like that. Not like, whereas, and then obviously, for example, you know, Scotland, the reason why Scotland isn't a country in the, like, strict sense of the word is because the UK government can tell Scotland what to do. When Scotland tried to pass the gender recognition reform, the British government vetoed it and said, no, you can't do that. And when that happened, that wasn't like, oh, you know, like the UK didn't have to submit a diplomat to the Scottish government and say, hey, you know, we're going to have an international issue if you pass. No, the UK government has authority over it. So, like, that, there we go. Just like, that's an example of how there's lots of things that people think are difficult to define. But if you really think about it for a second, that's my issue. When people say, oh, we can't define this thing, therefore it doesn't exist, it suggests to me a lack of interest in actually understanding the world to just say, oh, this is complicated, therefore let's give up on the entire idea we can understand it.
You know, there aren't chairs, there are just like atoms arranged chair-wise, being like a school of thought. And I was like, oh, that like explains to me how I think about gender, where I'm like, if you think of it in this prescriptive, like there's only these strict categories.
Okay, the problem with saying that is that you're wrong, because chairs actually do exist. So what you're admitting there, like essentially what you're saying is, yeah, the way I think about gender is equivalent to if you didn't think that chairs exist. That's like, okay, well, then you're admitting you're a moron.
We moved from ontology into Wittgenstein, I think, pretty quickly there. That definitely went into language.
See,
this is where my YouTube degree is falling apart a little bit, is because I was like, it's like a thing. I'm going to feel very dumb on this episode, and I know that going in. Well, I actually think you're much smarter and better than I am. I just taking two or three classes on it.
Yeah, that is true. It's actually like super easy to sound smart. Like a lot of people underappreciate the fact that all you have to do is learn a handful of phrases, like not even like concepts, just phrases. And sometimes like I don't think it's all about like it's not just about making yourself seem smart. For example, I mean, the one that I would say I use all the time is talking about the difference between ontology and epistemology. Ontology being, as I've said before, well, it's easy to say. Epistemology is how do we know things? Ontology is what is there to know? And the mistake a lot of people make is thinking because we might struggle to know something and it might be difficult for us to know something, therefore the answer to that thing doesn't exist. And that's obviously stupid. The really great analogy is how many birds are there in the sky right now? Well, that would be an almost impossible thing to answer, but there is a definitive objective answer. If you're new to the concept of ontology as distinct from epistemology, I would say you have literally just learned everything you need to know about that concept in the last 2 minutes. That it's what there is to be known versus how do we know it. And then, based on that, you can now, if someone makes an error in logical thinking, where they try to argue because it's difficult to know this thing, therefore that thing doesn't exist as a thing to be known, you can say, hey, you're confusing ontology and epistemology, and you will sound very smart, even though all you've done is, you know, like repeated something that you learned. And again, this is something I learned in a very quick amount of time. Like, it's not a very hard concept to explain. But the thing there is that's not even like, because people might say, oh, you know, so the reason you do that is because it's very easy and it makes you sound smart. No, the reason you do that is because it's actually the easiest way to understand it. Like, you could say, oh, well, just because it's hard to know something doesn't mean there's nothing to be known. But actually, it's quicker to say you're confusing ontology and epistemology. So in that context, it's just an easier way to communicate. And that's always like a key thing to look for. Like when someone is saying something that makes it sound smart or makes what they're saying sound smart, does it give the impression, or do you get the impression that they are saying that thing because it's the easiest way to communicate what they're saying? Or are they saying that thing actually it's quite a difficult way to communicate what they're saying, but it just makes them sound smart? And then if it's the latter case, you're probably dealing with a bit of a pseudo-intellectual.
But we were talking that the UK doesn't have free speech protections?
No. And like, if anything, like, I'm really weird because that's a pro-trans thing mostly. I mean, like, that's really weird because that objection of us not having free speech usually comes from the right, because, you know, like most of, like, the thing you're likely to be arrested for in terms of free speech is grossly offensive speech, and that means saying, you know, saying something offensive about a certain racial group. And yes, it has been used as it relates to gender identity. We also have, not that this is, I think, entirely relevant, although I do think this has been misappropriated. We have stricter rules when it comes to libel and slander. Again, like, sometimes I would say that's actually quite reasonable. Other times I would say that it's not been properly employed.
No, we don't have a First Amendment the way that you do. So we were talking about this before we rolled up. So
I also, like, I'm really surprised because, like, that's not a UK thing. Like, the US is unique in having a quite strict First Amendment. I'm actually not sure of any other country that has anything like the First Amendment, where it's just, you can say anything. I mean, the UK does have Speaker's Corner, which is a place where the rule is supposed to be that you can say literally anything. But yeah, like, if anything, the UK's laws are, I think, kind of in keeping with a lot of the Western world, and obviously a lot better than places outside the Western world.
There's a bunch of shit that you can say that I can't say.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing about that, though, is, like, what is Philosophy Tube even talking about in terms of, like, stuff that trans activists aren't allowed to say? The only thing I can think is, like, threats of violence. I mean, for example, I know that there was a trans activist who said Rishi Sunak should kill himself. And, like, I think the thing is, I don't think that was even, like, a legal issue. I think that was just said in a a Channel 4 report, and Channel 4 chose not to air it. I don't know whether or not that would be considered. The weird thing is, like, this is one of the things that annoys me about free speech laws. They're very rarely enforced consistently, which means that it essentially just becomes a tool for the state to attack you if they don't like you. That's one thing. That's my political philosophy. I hate laws that aren't enforced consistently, but are still occasionally enforced. I mean, I guess that's what inconsistent means. Because what it means is, therefore, because that law isn't enforced, you might well do that thing, and then, because you've done that thing, if someone decides they don't like you, they can just choose to enforce the law. Which is, I mean, obviously it's what happened to the civil rights movement, right? They made the drugs illegal because a lot of people in the civil rights movement were doing those drugs, and in that way, they could just enforce that law inconsistently. And yeah, like, basically, because weed is still illegal in the UK, but that law is not enforced, it means there are lots of people who smoke weed. I don't smoke weed, but if you smoke weed, that means that if the government decides they don't like you for some other reason, they can just decide, well, this person smokes weed, so we can, whenever we feel like it, arrest them for that law. And, like, that's why I hate, like, inconsistently enforced laws. And absolutely, with like hate speech, that's a very inconsistently enforced law. But I think certainly in a lot of contexts, saying, oh, this person should die, this person should be attacked violently, this person should kill themselves, saying stuff like that would be considered, you know, like, hate speech and incitement to violence, whatever else you want to call it. And as such, you know, that would be illegal. But the thing is, actually, from what I'm informed, even in America, a strict incitement to violence can get you arrested. I mean, obviously there was that movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7, where the whole point is that someone was facing a trial based on the idea that they had, with their words, incited a riot. So, you know, like, clearly there's a precedent in America for, if you say something and then it leads to violence, you can be arrested for that.
We have some bad shit going on for sure, but I don't think, you know...
I wonder when this came out, because obviously, like, America has just become incredibly anti-trans with the Donald Trump stuff.
So, like, when we find out that the UK or parts of Northern Europe are transphobic, I'm always like, what? Like, you guys have free healthcare. I thought you were nice, you know?
Well, again, so the issue is, and, like, it's not news to me that Americans struggle to understand other countries. The thing is, what the real big thing that they need to get their heads around is that a lot of the people who have issues with trans identity are radical feminists, communists, socialists, progressives, liberals. I mean, of course, the other thing is, because we have, you know, socialized healthcare, that means, at least nominally, and this is less the case now, but even conservative parties would still support nationalized healthcare. Like, a lot of the people who are in Europe, considered kind of equivalent to the Democrats, are basically the European equivalent to conservatives. Like, as far as I understand it, Angela Merkel's party are basically the Conservative Party. Because of the nature of how Europe is, basically, because of the Overton window, from an American perspective, they would seem to be like the Democrats.
It is so transphobic in the UK. It is crazy transphobic. And it seems like it's all J.K. Rowling. It really seems like it's 100% J.K. Rowling's fault.
Yeah, so I made a video relatively recently called The Day That J.K. Rowling Changed Everything. And I basically made the point that she did absolutely. And, you know, I even said in that video, it's a genuinely, like, interesting, in my view, alternative history scenario, and possibly to become an even more alternative well, even more interesting scenario as like things develop, to imagine what if J.K. Rowling hadn't made those tweets? What if the richest, most powerful woman with a huge amount of like cultural influence, Harry Potter, like biggest fantasy action adventure series of all time, what if she hadn't spoken up on this issue? And that's a really crazy thing to imagine, because it did make a huge difference.
You can't say that.
That's an opinion that you have. I can't comment on that opinion either way.
Oh, okay. So they are talking. So I've picked this up now. They're just talking about slander, libel. Like, this is all it's about. Okay, so that's a really different issue. Essentially, if you say so to clarify a point, as far as I know, there's two examples I'm aware of where J.K. Rowling has tried to tried to use this law against someone. The first example I can think of, which is the more recent one, was essentially someone said that J.K. Rowling was a Holocaust denier because she said that like trans people were not victims of the Holocaust. Now, the issue with that is to call someone a Holocaust denier is to suggest, like, to most people that would conjure up an idea of this person denies the systemic, industrialized mass genocide of millions of people by the Germans. The issue is we know that trans identity wasn't even like the same thing back in those times. And even if people were targeted, it wasn't necessarily because they were trans. It was because they were gay or gender non-conforming. And obviously that went against like what the Nazis were trying to do. But even those people, like, they were a very small number of people. So even if you did say, I don't think a single person who identified as trans was killed by the Nazis, that wouldn't really make you a Holocaust denier, because you're denying a very small fraction of it. And you're still acknowledging that, like, if you're acknowledging that millions of people were killed by the Nazis in a mass industrialized genocide, you aren't really a Holocaust denier. So essentially the argument there is that, well, it's communicating something that is not really honest about J.K. Rowling's opinion. And I think there have been people in general saying she's a Nazi. Well, obviously, the problem is if you call someone a Nazi, you are making a very definitive statement about their beliefs. And if that's not true, you are slandering them. And the second example is someone, J.K. Rowling made a comment about like stuff that she's ignored. Like basically, she made a comment like they've gone too far now. So she said, I've ignored so-and-so, I've ignored so-and-so, I've ignored porn tweeted at children, but I'm not going to ignore this. And I think it was like someone suggested that J.K. Rowling didn't care about mental health or something. And she was really upset about that because she actually like gives to some mental health charities and things like that. So what she was saying is, I've ignored all of this stuff, but this is like, this is the last straw. And someone basically made an image thing where it just had J.K. Rowling. It was a quote and it said, I've ignored porn tweeted at children, J.K. Rowling. And that person got hit by lawyers. And some people would say, well, hold on a minute, she just quoted it was actually a man who did it, unsurprisingly, because they're misogynists. He just obviously there are women who do the internalized misogyny thing too. But yeah, he just quoted J.K. Rowling, right? But the problem is, in taking that quote, if, you say, oh, well, I've ignored this thing, but I'm not going to ignore this. What that gives an impression of in the full context is these are all horrible, terrible things they've done, but I've let it slide because I've just been like, I can't be bothered, but now they've crossed the line. So the point is, these are all the terrible things they've done, and now here's this. Whereas if you just take the quote, I've ignored porn tweeted at children in context, it makes it sound like she didn't care about that issue. So the point is, by taking that quote out of context, they were giving a false impression. And if a newspaper did if a newspaper put out an article that says, J.K. Rowling says she ignored porn tweeted at children, then that newspaper would get in legal trouble, because even though they're reporting the exact words she said, they're communicating them in a way that makes it sound like J.K. Rowling doesn't care about children being subject to pornography, which I imagine is the exact opposite of her belief. So even though you're taking her exact quote, the way you're presenting it makes it sound dishonest. So I think that might be a difference between the UK law and the US law. And I think that's a pretty good difference, actually. that even though you might be technically saying something accurate, if it communicates something that's not only dishonest but the exact opposite of the truth, then in the UK, you can get subject to a legal smackdown based on that. Now, like I say, there have been examples, I think, where people have been, like, where these laws have been inappropriately used, and, like, people have said, like, my position, I will say, is I do think if the person who's made the statement genuinely believes it, then you shouldn't be allowed to sue them for libel, basically. Because that person genuinely believes what they're saying, and I don't think that I should be allowed to force someone to renounce a thing they genuinely believe, because I perceive it to be libel. And a really good example of this, I think there was more to this case than that, but someone, it doesn't really matter who it was to be honest, said of Ash Sakar, they said Ash Sakar worships a paedophile. And there were other things that this person said, and there was a whole, like, legal case based on some other accusations. For example, they said that Ash Sakar is an Islamist. Now, that's a slight different statement because Islamism is a specific ideology, and Ash Sakar doesn't seem to endorse that. So, like that would be an example where that isn't an accurate thing to say. But in there, so, and I don't really care about the exact details of what was said and how that's considered libel. But the upshot is that when this person eventually, so Ash Sakar won the case against this person. And by the way, Ash Sakar is like a liberal, progressive, trans activist. So the fact that, like, she won, like, that shows this isn't like some system that just exists to punish trans activists. It's just trans activists tend to get punished by it because they tend to lie more. So once Ash Sakar won, this person who'd made this comment had to put out a response saying, like, they retracted their statements. And one of the things they said is they said, it was actually quite funny. They said, I recognize that Muslims do not worship Muhammad. Now, the funny thing about, like, I always found that to be like a kind of it's one of those things where it's almost like the nature of the victory reveals it to have actually been a loss, because interestingly, the statement was, you worship a paedophile. And significantly, they couldn't, in a court of law, contend the idea that Muhammad was a paedophile. Like, obviously they couldn't. So she didn't retract that statement. She never said, oh, Muhammad wasn't a paedophile. So the only thing she had to retract was like that she worships him. And I just think, like, me personally, like, if I was a Muslim, I'd be really embarrassed if someone said, you worship a paedophile, and the only response I could say was, well, I don't technically worship him. Like, you're still admitting, like, through your silence that he was a paedophile. So I found it really funny. But the thing is, what I would say is, like, yeah, I realize Muslims don't claim to worship Muhammad, but they do. Like, the way they treat Muhammad, saying peace be upon him every single time they say his name, saying that he was the most perfect example for all man, basically, taking his word as gospel, doing everything that they can to be as much like him as possible, I would call that worship. And therefore, if someone tried to accuse me of libel because I said that they worship Muhammad, that would really annoy me, that would really bother me, and I'm not sure what I would do there, because I wouldn't want to retract that statement. Because even though that person would claim that they don't worship Muhammad, I would say, if you are a Muslim, based on the way that Islam treats Muhammad, the position of authority and supremacy that it places Muhammad in, if you are a Muslim, you do worship Muhammad. And yeah, so, like, that's an example where, yeah, I realize Muslims would not want to hear that. Muslims would think, no, we don't worship Muhammad. We just think he's a good guy. I mean, obviously, the other example would be Catholics with Mary. Obviously, Catholics worship Mary. They worship her as a goddess. They, like, bow down to her, pray to her, believe that, I literally saw a meme yesterday that was like, humanity's sin was like a train. And then there was a child, and a child was humanity, and then there was Superman, and Superman was stopping the train, and Superman was labeled the intercession of Mary. Like, obviously Catholics worship Mary, but they would claim that they don't. But the point is, I don't think anyone could deny when I see a meme that's like, Mary is the only sole reason why we're not being condemned for our sins, that from my perspective as a Christian, I'm going to look at that and say, well, that's obviously, like, worshipping her. So that's, like, honest. So I would say that. And, like, that's the thing, like, if someone called me a Nazi, or, like, a fascist, maybe, like, I think Nazi is a more specific term. If someone called me a fascist, I wouldn't want to, even if I had the resources, I wouldn't want to, like, make a libel case against them. Because I'd be like, well, honestly, like, if they actually think I'm a fascist, then that's stupid. But I wouldn't want to force them to recount something they genuinely believe using the law. Anyway, sorry, I feel like I'm actually... I'm a liar. I was like, oh, there might be loads of times I'm watching stuff and don't have anything to respond to, but I'm actually quite interested in this discussion.
Because, if I were to say that opinion, which, to be clear, I'm not.
Oh, sorry, I just realized I wanted to say something. The thing is, oh god, this is a disaster. Like, all of that was just to say that what that person just said there is it's J.K. Rowling's fault that the UK is so transphobic. I do not think that should be a statement considered libel. And I also don't think it would be considered libel. I don't think if someone said it's J.K. Rowling's fault the UK is so transphobic, I don't think that would actually, they'd face any legal issues for that. I mean, in some sense, like, I'd say that because, in my view, transphobia isn't actually a bad thing. It's just disagreeing with trans ideology. And since trans ideology is nonsense and harmful, to disagree with it is not a bad thing. And I made a video celebrating the fact that J.K. Rowling has normalized disagreement with trans ideology. So, since J.K. Rowling's normalized this disagreement with trans ideology, I would say that J.K. Rowling is the reason why the UK is so much more transphobic now. The difference is I wouldn't say it's her fault that it's so transphobic. I would say it's to her credit that J.K. Rowling has done this. But since I would essentially agree with the statement, J.K. Rowling is the cause of this rise in transphobia, again, as they would define transphobia, which is disagreeing with their ideology, I'd be fine. I mean, if someone said that, like, let's imagine I made that video criticizing Islam. If that video, like, completely blew up and it caused loads of people in the UK to start criticizing Islam, and people said, hey, that criticism of Islam is Islamophobic. And they said, so, King Critical is the reason why the UK is so Islamophobic now. I wouldn't, like, what, am I going to have a problem with that? No, yeah, you're right. I do think that insofar as Islamophobia means disagreeing with Islam, just like transphobia means disagreeing with trans ideology, absolutely. You want to say that I'm, like, the cause of that? That doesn't bother me. So, yeah, I don't think that is something, like, that anyone has been arrested or subject to libel for saying.
Yeah, you could cite the First Amendment as a legal defense. We do not have that. So here's an example I use when
Yeah, but again, it's also worth noting, like, the First Amendment doesn't cover you if you actually do libel or slander. Like, I do think, like, the one thing that, to be honest, should receive some legal protection in the UK, which currently doesn't receive any legal protection, is what I'm just going to call shit talking. Like, something where, like, you're essentially saying something that would be embarrassing for the person if it were true. But, like, isn't it embarrassing that you, like, if, like, I don't know, Keir Starmer tweets some nonsense and I say, hey Keir, isn't it embarrassing that last week at Parliament you accidentally called the leader of the opposition mummy in front of everyone? The point would be that I'm saying that because, like, that would be just an absurdist, silly thing, but technically speaking, I guess since that's supposed to be something that's kind of making fun of him, and it's also something that's not true, like, is that libel? I don't know. I think it should probably, like, have some kind of protection as basically just an absurdist joke where I'm saying something that isn't true to, like, make fun of him. I'd say that the function of that as a comment is to show, like, my lack of respect for him. Like, I'd say, because there is, like, a growing thing of you just, like, make fun of someone by making something up about them that's not true at all. And I do think the utility of that as a specific way of making fun of someone is it shows that you think they are so beneath your respect that they don't even warrant you making an actual legitimate criticism. You're just going to intentionally, willfully talk nonsense about them and make stuff up because you can't even be bothered to engage with what they're actually saying. Which I will say is a pretty, like, when you put it like that, it's a pretty alpha move.
There's a group in the UK called Republic who believe that we should not have a royal family.
Based.
The moment they got off the bus, they were arrested and held without charge in prison cells and then let go without charge.
I did hear, I mean, well, okay, you're let go without charge. I mean, I did hear, like, there's some weird rule about, I heard someone say that in the UK, you don't have the right to remain silent. But then I looked it up and it said you do have the right to remain silent. So I don't know if I should believe the internet or some random person who was on the internet. But I was like, I'm pretty sure you do have the right to remain silent in the UK. But yeah, I think, like, a lot of the rules around, like, am I being detained and stuff like that, I'm not sure. But by the way, let's not forget that there are people being held in Guantanamo Bay without charge. So, like, essentially, yeah, okay, awesome. The US has, like, this law that basically says you can't arrest someone and hold them indefinitely in a prison cell without charging them, but you can hold them in a CIA black site where they are tortured without any charge, which is just, it's ridiculous in a way, isn't it? But whatever.
They were going to protest in a way that was critical of the royal family, and for this they were arrested. And because
yeah, I mean, look, I will say this. I think sometimes like protests can be annoying, and it is okay to like in certain contexts restrict someone's right to protest things. Just because, like I've said before, I kind of wish there was a law that said within the first year of a government, you aren't allowed to protest anything that was in that government's manifesto. Because it's kind of like, aren't you just being like pointless there? Like you lost the election, you know, like they're doing the things that the people voted for them to do. So you shouldn't be allowed to protest it. Like, let's say, for example, and this is just like a complete analogy, a government won on the proposal of, I don't know, deporting 10,000 illegal, I don't even know if there are 10,000, there probably are, but let's say, and this is just like 10,000 illegal migrants per year. Like, that's their very specific promise. So, in the first year, they deport 10,000 legal migrants. But like 6 months in, someone's like, oh, we're going to do a massive protest against the fact they're doing this. Well, isn't that pointless? Like, what's the point now? Like, you think they're going to be like, okay, in that case, we'll abandon. Like, essentially, if the protest is successful, then all you've achieved is them abandoning their electoral promise that they made. So, like, that's why I kind of think if the point of a protest is to get a government to immediately abandon a thing that they promised they were going to do, that everyone voted for them to do, then, like, that just seems pointless. Because, again, there's no like possible upside there, right? If I became Prime Minister of the UK, I'd be like, right, for the first year, I'm going to be doing some policies. Maybe some people aren't going to like them, but these were the policies that I was elected to do. So I'm going to introduce a new law that says if you protest any of these policies, then you can be arrested for that. Because at the end of the day, that's not a good energy to have. That's not like good for the country to have some portion of the country just protesting things that the other like people voted for. So there we go. That's my take. Which again, it's not really a free speech thing. It's more like a freedom of assembly thing, which are different things. Like obviously you can say anything. Like I wouldn't say, oh, you shouldn't be allowed to criticize what I'm doing. I'm just saying you shouldn't be allowed to get together in a public place and disrupt things, bring like a negative, aggressive vibe to, whatever's going on, like people are trying to celebrate something or something, because that's not appropriate. And we do have legitimate laws. For example, I don't think that someone should be allowed to protest at a Remembrance Day ceremony. If there's like some tragedy, people shouldn't be allowed to protest there because that would be like bringing down the decorum. So at best, I'd say like this concern, like, I mean, I think I don't support the monarchy. I think protesting it is legitimate. But like at best, this is like a question of, well, the fact they were specifically doing that at the coronation, which is supposed to be a celebration and stuff like that. Like they were just like, oh, we don't want that. Like we don't want this negative energy, this negative vibe from these people. It's basically just a question of where do you think that lies on the spectrum? Do you think that's like people protesting at a Remembrance Day ceremony where it really shouldn't be something that's being protested? Or do you think it's like, oh, it's just some people gathering together? And it's basically subjective. So whatever your opinion on it is fine by me.
And our media and entertainment system is run by about 100 people who all went to the same university and all know each other. There's plenty of things that you legally can say, but which would end your career if you did. It's not like the US where, like, if you fuck up in New York, you can move to Chicago, you can move to LA. If you're on the shit list in this country, you're done.
Yeah.
I feel like this is really funny because, like, I know it was that guy recently who said, oh, this guy's, like, parroting conspiracy theories that sound like anti-Semitism. Like, I mean, to be fair, like, that sounds literally just like, which again, like, I'm not saying, like, I don't care, but I'm just saying it's very funny that, like, people would, if I said, oh, like, there's people who are in charge of this country, there's like an elite, and they all know each other, and they're working together, and they're like doing things that are bad for the overall country, people would be like, oh, that's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, because obviously they want to paint me as like right wing. But if Philosophy Tube says basically the same thing, well, that's just like, oh, well done, speaking truth to power.
Ah, wow,
that's crazy.
And also, I don't know if that's more true of the UK than it is of the US. Like, to say, oh, well, in the US, like, there's not this massive media elite that controls everything.
What's interesting is then in America, like, a lot of, like, legitimate hate speech that's not even actually covered under the First Amendment, people try to be like, oh no, it's the First Amendment. Do you think there's any
See, that's the thing. Yeah, you'll notice there. Like, free speech, hate speech is not covered under the First Amendment.
not saying it's good, but is there any like weird trickle down silver lining of like that clamps down on hate speech in some way?
Yeah, obviously. Like, see, that's the thing. Like, this is that's the key thing. Most of this idea of we don't have free speech in the UK, that's about like people saying stuff that's contrary to, let's say, wokeness. So people being racist, if you like, people being sexist, people being homophobic. Like a Christian street preacher is far more likely to get arrested for saying that gay marriage is an abomination than, like some random person's likely to get silenced by J.K. Rowling for calling her a Nazi.
Yeah, like
you can't heil in Germany, or I think you're
Oh, yeah, tough luck, Elon Musk.
Well, there are Jewish people in Germany right now who are being locked up for criticizing the Israeli government. So
really,
kind of, not a million.
because in Germany.
Yeah, like Germany's like crazy about that. Like that's the thing. Germany's so funny. Germany's like they love being on the wrong side of everything.
Oh yeah. Germany is like seriously clamping down on pro-Palestine protests.
It's like Germany ever been right? I mean, like I guess the closest Germany's ever come to being like the good guys was in World War One. How like actually. Like their plan for if they won World War One was to actually bring a lot of countries closer together, and it actually might have been better in the end if they won, because like they're actually some pretty chill dudes in Germany. They just they just got a bit angry about losing World War One, so like you could maybe say in a roundabout sense they were the good guys there, but. I mean, World War One was also a very pointless war that killed a lot of people, and it can't be denied Germany had a pretty substantial role in starting it. So I don't know if we can give them the dub there. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure when Germany's ever really been on the right side of anything.
I mean, a lot of the transphobia in the UK, we rely on American journalists to report it because our media either won't because they're disinclined to because I'm.
Well, let's be honest, okay. Do we rely on American journalists to report transphobia? Like, rely on it in what sense? Like, what happens if we don't get the transphobia reported? Like, who really cares? And second of all, are American journalists really being like consulted? Like, who actually is saying, "Oh, thank God we got these American journalists to report this stuff"? I don't think anyone's actually really engaging that, apart from maybe a handful of people who, let's be honest, would probably know about this anyway without the American journalists. This idea that like, well, you need an American journalist to do it. Well, no, you can just have like niche British journalists are also capable of doing it. It's just the fact that they might not care. But then again, at the same time, it's not as if American like mainstream news is wall to wall coverage of, hey, look at the transphobia happening in the UK. I don't know. Like, I would be surprised if any mainstream news in the US, because that's the thing, right? The claim here is that this is about like the mainstream news shutting them out. So is the mainstream news in the US reporting on like the transphobia of the British government? I can't imagine that's being a thing on MSNBC, CNN, even Fox. Like, and obviously they might be reporting on it in like a more positive way. But yeah, I mean, if anything, there's probably been more in terms of mainstream news, more like, look at how crazily pro-trans the UK is from people like Fox, than there's been, look at how really anti-trans the UK is from, more left-wing or moderate liberal American stations.
Our media, there's like 100 people who run our media are also like extremely fucking transphobic, but also because there's
Again, same thing I always say. Is there any mainstream UK newspaper that does not use trans-affirming pronouns? Because it doesn't seem very transphobic if you're literally willing to deny reality to accommodate trans people.
Ah, shit, what was I going to say? Oh, do you think that makes it harder for comedians, too?
No, see, this is like an interesting thing, right? Because, again, like the thing about comedians in the UK, like right now, it's basically you got one side of people who are like, I'm woke, I'm anti-woke, and I'm like controversial, and hey guys, I'm telling some jokes, but don't cancel me. And then you got the other side who's like, unironically, like, hey, I'm super woke and I'm gonna make fun of like cis white men and how bad they are, and in the middle of it, there's a tiny fraction of people who are just like, let's actually like make funny comedic observations about reality.
The way that you get into a career in comedy here is you go to Cambridge.
So this is actually like, I hate to agree with Philosophy Tube, but this is exactly my observation. Just then, when I said that like comedy in the UK isn't funny, that's like slightly, wait, let me just let it play for 1 second.
And then you have a career in our media. If you want.
Okay, so that's not quite... So what I would say is there's two ways in the UK, it seems to me, that people become comedians. One, they go to Cambridge, and two, they like basically do comedic shows at holiday camps. So, for example, Lee Mack, very, very funny comedian in the UK. But, you know, I know I said no UK comedians are funny. There's a caveat to him being very funny. He became a comedian. He was discovered doing comedy stand-up at like family-friendly resorts. And the problem with that type of comedy is it's very easygoing, very like safe. It's kind of like observational comedy, this type you get from like, I don't know, Dane Cook or something, where it's just like, hey, has anyone noticed the way, you know, like, I mean, it's like the classic Jerry Seinfeld thing, like, hey, how about that airline food? Comedy that's just very like easygoing, that a bunch of drunk people on their summer holiday would laugh at, that whether someone's like 80 or 12, they would find it funny. And that's like one way that people become funny. So even while like Lee Mack, I would say, is like funny, and he's very quick-witted, his actual material is very blasé. It's very, I hope blasé is the right word I'm looking for, where it's just like the most kind of typical, uninventive, uncreative observations about reality. So that's like an aspect of British comedy. And then the other aspect is, like Philosophy Tube just said, the people who went to Cambridge, who, like, that's how they became comedic. And what's completely missing is what seems to be the main way that people become comedians in the US, which is touring around nightclubs and going to New York City and performing, again, in a club, a comedy club, where, you know, you actually have to entertain adults who maybe are drunk, maybe are kind of aggressive, maybe actually they want comedy that's a little bit more edgy. And I would say like a lot of comedy in the UK is missing an edge, and the comedy that we do have is like very safe edgy, where it's either the kind of like edgy thing that someone would say, you know, if they've like been educated at Cambridge or something, or the kind of safe edgy of like something that would make an audience kind of groan, at you know, like, yeah, like a family resort. So like a lot of like British comedy is sexual innuendo, because sexual innuendo is, it's you know, it's a little bit naughty, but it's not too naughty. Whereas, you know, it seems like a lot of American comedy is a lot more aggressive and therefore funnier. And that's my observation. And it is also a correct observation. We believe it or not, we're actually past the time when I'm supposed to be recording. And well, I know why this happened. I think we all know why this happened. It's because they were talking about too many interesting things that I had too many comments on. But let's just let it play briefly.
Want to have
no, that happens here
me.
too. That happens here too. You go to Harvard and you work for the Lampoon.
I actually did not know that was the thing. I was about to say, like, I did not know that. Like, my assumption is going to be that no American comedian becomes a comedian by going to Harvard. But it seems like maybe the difference is like being a stand-up comedian. Because, yeah, there are stand-up comedians in the UK who went to Cambridge or Oxford. I hope you enjoyed. You know, I'm aware that this was a video where we didn't necessarily cover, like, it's kind of the opposite to last week's video. Where last week's video, I felt like I had very little to say. This video, I'm like, actually, you know what? Almost every other thing they said, I was like, I could make a comment on that, because it's all very interesting. I mean, obviously, one of the issues is, as you know, well, I assume you know, my wife is American, so I've spent a lot of time talking to my in-laws about differences between the UK and the US, and I have just so many. I could talk for hours about the very, like, subtle, like, not the obvious ones, like, oh, they drive on the wrong side of the road, but, like, the really subtle differences culturally, politically, between the US and the UK. So yeah, unfortunately, there was, as soon as they started talking about like, hey man, like, why isn't the UK kind of weird, dude? there was no chance I wasn't going to have a lot to say. So I apologize if you thought that maybe we could have spoken more about trans identity specifically instead of like vague differences, but it's just so interesting. All right, everyone. See you later. Bye.